Number 12. Lightened Sten gun triggers. A man jumps down from a vehicle, and the gun fires before his finger ever reaches the trigger. The burst goes up into his neck. That was a Sten doing what a Sten could do even in factory condition. A cheap, open-bolt submachine gun that could be jarred hard enough for the bolt to race forward, chamber around, and fire. Now picture someone in the platoon deciding the trigger is too heavy, too crude, too slow, and taking a file to the sear so the gun feels better in the hands. On most weapons, that sounds like a small comfort upgrade. On a Sten, the trigger is not releasing a tidy hammer. It is releasing the breech block itself. Reduce the margin too far, and the gun stops behaving like a weapon and starts behaving like an accident set off by movement, dirt, or panic. Why were the modifications soldiers wanted most often the ones armies feared enough to ban? Number 12. The trigger that turned a Sten into a reflex. You are in the back of a British Army vehicle with 8 or 9 other men. Knees knock against webbing and steel. The whole truck hammers over ruts hard enough to shake your teeth. It is World War II. Somewhere in that crush is a Sten Mark II, 30 inches of tube and stamped metal, 6 pounds, 8 ounces, empty. A 32-round magazine sticking out of the side like an afterthought. Cheap. Fast to make. By the end of the war, Britain will build millions of them, more than 2,600,000 Mark IIs alone. But in that moment, it is just another gun bouncing against another soldier's thigh while the driver hits one more hole in the road. Bruce Coombs, serving with the 6th Battalion Royal Welch Fusiliers, later described what happened next. A man jumps down from the vehicle. Just that. A boot on the edge, a drop to the ground, a jolt through sling and metal. The Sten bangs against him, or the floor, or the side as he lands, and the gun fires upward into his neck. Not because he aimed, not because he chose to. A Sten fires from an open bolt. Pull the trigger, and you are not tripping a neat little hammer onto a cartridge. You are releasing the whole breech block under spring pressure. The bolt runs forward, strips a 9mm round from the magazine, chambers it, and fires in one motion. If a hard enough shock throws that bolt back far enough to clear the sear, and if it slams forward again, the firing cycle can start without any deliberate shot at all. Stay in that platoon a little longer, because this is where the temptation sits. The Sten is ugly to hold, ugly to trust, ugly to shoot well. Its trigger is crude, heavy, rough. It feels like dragging bent tin over grit. So somebody decides to improve it. Not an armory redesign. Not Enfield reworking timing en masse. Just a file, a stone, maybe a bit of barrack room confidence. Ease the resistance, trim the sear face, take off just enough metal that the trigger breaks sooner and the gun feels faster in the hands. It sounds sensible when the weapon is resting quiet across your lap. You can read the logic on a man's face as he works. The Sten fires 9mm parabellum at around 550 rounds a minute. In short bursts, that can be useful, but only if you can make the thing behave. Only if the trigger gives you something clean enough to control. So he strips the trigger group under weak light. Receiver tube, trigger housing, sear, spring. Grease blackening the fingertips. Few strokes too many will not look like much. The change lives in feel, not appearance. Morning comes. The gun is reassembled. Bolt back. Magazine on. 32 rounds in the stack. Everything looks normal because everything still works. You shoulder it, and it fires. You pull again, and it fires again. Better, maybe. Lighter. Quicker. The kind of improvement a man might brag about with a grin and a cigarette. But the Sten's margin was thin before anyone touched the sear. The trigger is holding back the breech block itself. If that engagement becomes weak, worn, dirty, or simply too light, the weapon starts doing things separated only by inches and luck. A bump can jar it loose. Mud can keep it from catching cleanly. A half-worn notch can let the bolt skate past instead of holding. The gun that should stop after one shot may run on. The gun that should stay inert may wake up when dropped, kicked, or climbed out of a truck with. And this is a Sten. Dirt gets everywhere. Some wartime examples had trigger housing problems simply from how they were built. Wrapped receiver guns left the trigger group less supported and more exposed to filth, bad enough that some were later sought out for destruction. Picture the actual conditions: wet canvas, road dust, oil, grit, a weapon assembled in a hurry by one factory and repaired in the field by someone else. ROF Thiel, Fazakerley, BSA Enfield. The names stamped on the lineage do not matter once the gun is in a ditch with a weakened sear and mud in the works. You climb down with it anyway, one hand on the truck, one boot searching for the ground. The magazine presses against your kit. Sling snags for a heartbeat on something behind you. The bolt is sitting there under spring tension. The altered sear is holding by less than it used to, maybe much less. You do not feel that in your fingers. You find out only when the weight of the landing snaps through the metal. When it goes wrong at full speed. Bolt forward, round stripped, chambered, fired. No warning beyond the click you never hear because the shot is already there. At 550 rounds per minute, even a fraction of a second is enough to turn a slip into a burst. The platoon does not need a lecture to understand what it just saw. A man is on the ground. The weapon has done what no one wanted and exactly what its design made possible. Men stare at the Sten as if it has crossed a line from bad weapon to bad creature. That line was always thinner than it looked. The filed trigger made it thinner still. Some British engineers did lighten parts on one Sten variant, the suppressed Mark II IS, but not like this. They changed bolt weight and recoil characteristics in a controlled design intended mainly for semi-automatic use, with full auto kept for emergency. That is engineering. This is subtraction. A soldier with a file is not balancing timing. He is stealing margin from the one part of the gun that decides whether the bolt stays put or comes hunting forward. So the scene closes where Bruce Coombs opened it. Not on a range, not in a workshop, but beside a vehicle after one jump to the ground. One jolt, one crude gun, one improvement small enough to vanish into metal and large enough to take the safety with it. It did not make the Sten smoother, it made it hair-trigger unstable. Number 11. Sawn-off Lee Enfield rifles. The riflemen tried to shorten before the Army admitted they were right. On September 12, 1944, the British Army officially adopted the rifle No. 5 Mark I. It looked like another Lee Enfield variant. In the hands of Australian troops in New Guinea, it pointed to something more awkward, an official confession. 2 years earlier, in 1942, men trying to keep Port Moresby from falling to Japan had already learned the same lesson. With mud on their boots and vines in their faces, a full-length rifle could be too much gun for jungle fighting. One of the men living that problem was Brigadier Ralph Honor. In 1942, Honor commanded the 39th Battalion on the Kokata track. Combat there meant climbing, slipping, sweating, and getting hit at close range in country that swallowed distance. This was not open desert. It was not a parade ground. It was steep mountain trail, wet packs, rotten footing, and sudden contact. A rifle that felt manageable on the drill field could turn into a burden after miles of ascent. The standard short magazine Lee Enfield No. 1 Mark III had been built for another kind of war. It was long, solid, and reliable. But reliability only solves part of the problem when every extra inch catches brush and every extra ounce rides on your shoulders. The later No. 4 Lee Enfield measured 44.5 inches and weighed 8 pounds 11 ounces. Those numbers matter on a range. They matter more when you are climbing toward a firing point in rain, with ammunition, food, and the rest of your life strapped to you. Honor's men did not need a technical memorandum to tell them what felt wrong. The track told them. The temptation was obvious. The rifle down. Armies hate that kind of answer. A soldier sees length and removes length. A workshop sees steel and wood. A regulation sees damaged crown property, altered ballistics, ruined sights, and another uncontrolled weapon in a war already full of improvisation. Earlier British sources treated the practice as strictly prohibited. If an SMLE was cut short, it was not supposed to be because some infantrymen wanted a handier gun in the jungle. Legitimate cut-down rifles usually belonged to narrow, specialized roles, including igniters for trench mortars. That leaves a mess for later historians and collectors, because not every butchered Lee Enfield was a rogue combat carbine. Some were official oddities from older wars, some were damaged rifles, some were post-war sporters, some were fantasies with fresh saw marks and old stories attached. Honor's problem was real, whether the surviving myth is clean or not. In 1942, Australian forces requested something shorter and lighter during the fight to save Port Moresby. That request did not come from a designer's whim. It came out of the jungle itself, out of the same pressure that makes men start looking at a service rifle with a saw. It also fits the larger pattern running through this story. The weapons armies tried hardest to ban or bury often began as field solutions to conditions the rulebook had not caught up with. Instead of legalizing the saw, the army legalized the idea. At Lithgow in New South Wales, Australian designers began work on shortened experimental Lee Enfields. These became the No. 6 Jungle Rifle Project. Britain took a parallel route with the No. 5, based not on the older SMLE, but on the number. Or rifle. The principle matched the illicit hack. The method did not. Do not just remove wood and steel. Rebalance the whole weapon. Shorten it, yes, but add a flash eliminator. Fit a rubber recoil pad. Machine lightning cuts into the receiver. Keep the 10-round magazine. Keep loading by 5-round charger clips. Keep the rifle a rifle, not a mutilated emergency tool. By the time the No. 5 was finalized in March 1944, the numbers were clear. Overall length dropped to 39.5 inches. Barrel length fell to 20.5. Nearly 5 inches were gone from the weapon's total profile. And gone in a way a factory could reproduce 251,136 times. 169,807 at ROF Fazakerley, and another 81,329 at BSA Shirley. This was not a quirky side branch. It was mass acceptance. Australia wanted its own version too. The planned order for the No. 6 reached 40,000 rifles, but only around 300 trials or prototype guns were actually made before production was cancelled. The Australian answer to Honor's jungle problem never truly flooded the front in Australian form. Britain's answer did. The army arrived, carefully and officially, at the same place a tired infantryman might have reached with one look at his rifle and one forbidden thought. What makes this story slippery is how thin the evidence is for actual illicit sawn-off Lee Enfields in Second World War combat. Surviving cut-down rifles exist in collections, but some trace back to First World War tunnelers. One examined example in a UK Ministry of Defence collection was so extreme it was almost absurd. An SMLE reduced to about 64 centimeters, or 25 inches, with a barrel of roughly 4 inches. It was based on an SMLE Mark I made in 1906. Buttstock remained. The practical sights were gone. Yet a long-range volley peep sight still clung to the gun like a fossil from another doctrine entirely. A close-quarters stump of a rifle carrying the ghost of Victorian distance fire. That weapon tells you something important, but not the simple thing people want. It proves the idea of a butchered Lee Enfield was real. It proves official and unofficial cut-down rifles existed. It does not cleanly prove that Australian or Commonwealth soldiers in New Guinea or Burma were routinely sawing down SMLEs in the field during World War II. The myth may have migrated from WWII tunnel guns, from mortar igniters, from damaged rifles, from post-war cut-downs, from collectors who love a dramatic label almost as much as armies hate embarrassing improvisations. Honor's world still explains why the story refuses to die. Picture the Kokoda track in 1942. Not an office, not a proving range. Mountain jungle, where the fight closes inside sightlines measured in yards. Men are exhausted. Equipment is soaked. Every shape on the rifle matters now. The muzzle, the forestock, the full awkward length of a weapon made for empire and carried through a green wall. You do not need a surviving confession from every private with a hacksaw to understand the pressure. The need came first. Documentation came later, if it came at all. Official design followed because the need did not go away. When the No. 5 finally appeared, With its shorter body, flash hider, recoil pad, and engineered weight reduction, it looked like innovation. In another sense, it was simpler than that. It was an army catching up to a soldier's forbidden thought. Honor did not become famous for sawing rifles in half. He became famous because he and his men held in conditions that stripped military theory down to use and burden. His story matters here for that reason. The sawed-off Lee Enfield sits in a gray zone between myth and memory, between prohibited mutilation and official adaptation. The jungle created the demand, but the paperwork refused the method. The ban stayed on the crude version. The state manufactured a cleaner copy of the same idea. The hacked rifle was not vindicated by evidence boards or collector tables. It was vindicated by adoption orders. Adopted September 12, 1944. Number 10. Sawed-off Winchester Model 1897 trench shotguns. On September 19, 1918, Brigadier General Samuel T. Ansel, the acting Judge Advocate General of the U.S. Army, signed a reply to a German diplomatic protest. The complaint was blunt. American soldiers were using shotguns in the trenches, and Germany argued those guns violated the laws of war because they caused unnecessary suffering. Not machine guns, not heavy artillery, not gas. Shotguns. That accusation helped build one of the stickiest myths in military gun history. The story usually goes like this. Somewhere in the mud, an American took a long, sporting shotgun, hacked the barrel down, and created a terror weapon so savage the enemy tried to ban it. It is a perfect story. Outrage, improvisation, a legal protest that makes it sound official. But the evidence points somewhere else. The wartime gun was already short. The base weapon was Winchester's Model 1897 riot gun, a 12-gauge pump with a 20-inch barrel, cylinder bore, and a 5-round tubular magazine. 20 inches, not a field amputation, not some anonymous private with a saw behind the lines. It was a factory-made short gun, then militarized for trench work with sling swivels, a perforated steel heat shield, and a bayonet adapter built for the M1917 bayonet. The famous ugly little brute was not a mutilated hunting piece. It was an arsenal idea, assembled on purpose. The myth hides inside one word: sawed off. It sounds criminal, improvised, barely controllable. The actual Winchester trench gun was measured, repeatable, and ordered in quantity. Even the details are dull in the way solid evidence often is. Heat shield, bayonet lug, sling hardware, standardized parts. This is the kind of gun that shows up in procurement language, not barracks gossip. The gun also had one trait that helped the legend spread. The Model 1897 lacked a trigger disconnector. Hold the trigger back, work the slide, and it would fire the instant the action closed. Slam fire. In a trench, in a dugout, in a bamboo thicket, that gave a 5-shot pump a rhythm closer to panic than marksmanship. You can see how memory would simplify it. Men do not come home talking about disconnectors. They say the shotgun was cut down and fired as fast as you could rack it. Follow the paper trail into World War II, and the same pattern appears again. After Pearl Harbor, the U.S. military expanded fast and went looking for close-range weapons it already understood. In early 1942, trench gun contracts again called for 12-gauge pump shotguns. The Winchester Model 1897 was there, alongside the Model 12, the Ithaca 37, the Stevens 520-30, and the Stevens 620A. If the dramatic version were true, this is where you would expect to find it. Marines and soldiers in jungle fighting, cutting old Winchesters down even further for handier use. The documented World War II guns do not look like crude hacks. Collectors and arms historians identify wartime Model 1897 trench guns by the opposite signs. World War I trench guns were solid frame guns. World War II production trench guns were takedown frame guns. They carry U.S. and ordnance markings. They show contract patterns. They fit the standard military setup: 12-gauge, 20-inch barrel, handguard and bayonet adapter in the Type W style, set up to take the M1917 bayonet. That bayonet stayed because logistics won. Army already had enough M1917 bayonets. Switching shotgun contracts over to Garand or Springfield patterns would have created a second shotgun bayonet system for no good reason. The forensic picture is dry but clear. Start with the barrel, 20 inches. Start with the action, pump. Start with the magazine, 5 rounds in the tube. Start with the frame type, takedown in World War II production, not the old solid frame First World War pattern. Start with the fittings, heat shield, bayonet adapter, military marks. None of it looks like a battlefield chop job. It looks like a weapon that arrived from the system already optimized for ugly, close work. The myth gets traction because there really is a legal line, just not the one the legend claims. Under U.S. federal law, the moment a shotgun drops below an 18-inch barrel or is cut from a shotgun into an overall length under 26 inches, it enters the regulated category of a short-barreled shotgun under the National Firearms Act definition. That is the actual sawed-off zone in American law. Below that line, the gun stops being merely compact and becomes a specially regulated firearm. People looking backward from modern legal language see a short military trench gun, here banned shotgun, and mentally shave off another 2 inches that were never part of the wartime spec. You can watch the confusion happen almost in real time. Government paperwork did not always call them trench guns. Often they were listed more blandly as riot guns with a bayonet attachment. Collectors later preferred the cleaner label, trench gun. It sticks in the mind. It sells the image. Trench gun drifts toward cut-down trench gun, and cut-down trench gun drifts toward sawed-off Winchester. Suddenly, a contract weapon with a 20-inch barrel becomes, in popular memory, a kind of outlawed field special. The named World War II case people want most never appears. The soldier or Marine who definitely took a Winchester Model 1897 trench gun and cut it below standard length in the field. The pressure existed. Jungle fighting did that to everything. Length became a burden. Weight became an argument. Any man carrying a shotgun through wet brush could feel the appeal of losing steel and wood. But pressure is not proof. Here, the surviving proof points the other way. Factory dimensions, military contracts, ordnance marks, repeatable fittings. So what did Germany actually protest in 1918? Not a homemade monster, a regulation American combat shotgun. Its brutality came from buckshot at close range and from the speed of that old exposed hammer pump in practiced hands. The legal complaint was real. The fear was real. The gun was real. The most famous detail does not survive measurement. Picture it in 1942. A takedown frame Winchester Model 1897 comes out of a crate with U.S. markings, a 20-inch barrel, a perforated handguard, and an M1917 bayonet mount already in place. Nothing improvised. Nothing accidental. Then somebody, somewhere, calls it a sawed-off trench shotgun anyway. After that, the label does the work. The paperwork is still there. The barrel is still 20 inches. The myth keeps cutting. Number 9. Cut-down M1 carbines. On Peleliu in 1944, between coral ridges and cave mouths, a Marine posed with 2 nearly identical weapons. They were not identical at all. One was a standard US M1 carbine. The other had been captured from Japanese hands and cut down until its whole geometry changed. Same receiver family, same .30 carbine lineage, but the official gun measured 35.6 inches from muzzle to butt. This one had lost the butt entirely, and often some of the barrel with it. What remained looked less like a rifle than a machine pistol made by argument and hacksaw. Start with the approved version. The numbers show where the line was. In May 1942, the U.S. standardized the M1A1 for airborne troops. In October 1942, Inland Division of General Motors in Dayton, Ohio, began deliveries. Roughly 140,000 were made in wartime, 140,591 in some counts. It folded, but the working parts did not shrink. The barrel stayed normal. The action stayed normal. The stock simply swung aside so a paratrooper could jump with it. That was the official answer to compactness. Keep the carbine a carbine, just make it easier to carry. The basic M1 already lived in that compact world. It weighed about 5.5 to 5.8 pounds. It fed from a 15-round box magazine. More than 6.1 million were made during the war. It was not the full-length M1 Garand with its weight and reach. It was the lighter gun for officers, radiomen, mortar crews, drivers, and men who needed both hands for everything except the moment they had to shoot. It gave them semi-automatic fire in a package short enough to move through doors, over dashboards, under radio aerials, and out of parachute harness. The Army had already solved the problem of handiness. Battlefields kept asking for 1 inch less, 1 pound less, 1 motion less. Look at what the field modification changed. Remove the shoulder stock, and you remove the third point of contact. A normal carbine stabilizes at the shoulder, the firing hand, and the support hand. Cut the stock away, and the rear anchor vanishes. The weapon comes off the body and out into the hands. It gets faster to present in a tunnel, at a cave opening, inside a truck cab, or in a night fight where every corner is at arm's length. The same cut strips away the part that lets a shooter drive recoil straight back into the torso. The gun becomes shorter. It also becomes less obedient. Then, the barrel changes everything else. Shorten it, and several measurements collapse with it. Sight radius comes first. The distance between front and rear sight shrinks, so a small error in alignment produces a larger miss downrange. Velocity comes next. The .30 carbine round loses some of the barrel time that lets powder finish its work. The gun remains lethal. It no longer performs as the original system was designed to perform. The official M1A1 preserved those numbers. The cut-down field version spent them. That trade makes sense only when you put the weapon where it was found. Peleliu, September 1944. Heat over 100 degrees, coral dust, ridges broken into knife-edged folds, Japanese positions dug into caves and reverse slopes. A Marine crawls over sharp coral with a weapon in front of him. A barrel catches rock, a stock drags. A muzzle appears before the man behind it does. Sentences can open across broken ground, then collapse to a few feet at a firing slit. In that terrain, a standard 35.6-inch weapon is not huge, but every inch still exists. Someone decided the official compact carbine was still not compact enough. That part remains unresolved. It may have been altered by an American before capture. It may have been altered by Japanese personnel after capture. The surviving references do not settle it. They show the object. They do not securely identify the workshop, the unit armorer, or the exact date of conversion. But the object gives away the logic. Not a rifle meant to be aimed from the shoulder, not quite a pistol. A stopgap for places where a shoulder stock had become extra length you could no longer afford. One reported detail pushes it further: automatic fire. If true, the purpose changes completely. A standard wartime M1 carbine is semi-automatic, one trigger pull, one shot. Full auto turns a compact support weapon into something else, a close-range bullet hose built for bursts, not deliberate fire. Without the stock, that sounds reckless. At cave-mouth distance, inside a vehicle, or in a snap fight in jungle darkness, automatic fire from a short weapon solves an immediate problem. You are not trying to win a marksmanship match. You are trying to fill a hole in space before the other man fills you. The same numbers that make the idea attractive expose its cost. 15 rounds disappear fast on automatic. Less barrel means more blast close to the shooter. Less weight means the gun moves more in the hands. No shoulder stock means control gets worse exactly when the firing rate gets higher. The M1 carbine was designed as a light rifle. The cut-down version pushed it toward the machine pistol category without redesigning the rest of the system around that role. It was compact because material had been removed, not because engineers had solved recoil, balance, and feeding from the ground up. The distinction from the M1A1 matters. The M1A1 was a sanctioned compromise. Folding stock, same ballistic package. The cut-down gun was a field compromise of a different kind. It accepted losses the ordnance system had refused to accept. Barrel length, sight radius, shoulder support. If you want the dividing line in modern legal numbers, it sits at 16 inches of barrel and 26 inches overall for a short-barreled rifle under U.S. federal definitions. Those are post-war legal thresholds, not wartime battlefield rules. They still show how clearly later law recognized the category this kind of modification falls into. Cut a rifle below those dimensions and it enters a different class of weapon. That class kept coming back. Post-war manufacturers eventually sold M1-style pistols from companies like Iver Johnson, Universal, and later, Inland. A battlefield improvisation became a catalog item. The idea survived because people kept seeing the same advantage the unknown modifier saw in 1944. Shorter can be faster, and faster can keep you alive. The weapons that break doctrine are often the ones that fit the fight too well. Officially, the carbine was a 35.6-inch shoulder arm, standardized, mass-produced, bounded by design. On the ground, in caves and vehicles and night ambushes, it kept getting dragged towards something smaller, rougher, and harder to justify. Proved weapon folded. The real one got cut. Number 8. Filed tip rifle cartridges. On August 31, 1940, a New Yorker reporter walked through Osterley Park, west of London, and found a country estate being turned into a school for dirty war. The lawns were still there. The house was still there. Inside the grounds, Tom Winteringham's unofficial Home Guard training school was teaching volunteers to picture what Britain was trying hard not to picture. German troops already ashore, villages already occupied, the countryside no longer scenery, but a weapon. Men learned sabotage, ambush, concealment. They learned how to make roads dangerous and hedgerows useful. Historian Malcolm Atkins says they were told one more thing before they returned to their local units. Between July and late September 1940, roughly 5,000 potential guerrillas passed through Osterley. They were told to take their rifle rounds, file the tips, and make dum-dums. Placed in context, it stops sounding like rumor. This was summer 1940. Dunkirk had just happened. The Battle of Britain was still undecided. Britain had a home guard full of volunteers, shotguns, old rifles, and very little certainty. Osterley was not training men for parade ground soldiering. It was training them to stay behind after the front line was gone. If invasion came, they were supposed to disappear into copses and lanes, strike at transport, shoot officers, wreck communications, and vanish again. For that job, the logic was blunt. A standard rifle bullet punched through. A filed one was meant to stop a man harder. Years later, that detail kept surfacing because it was too specific to ignore and too compromising to celebrate. Not a secret superweapon, not a factory project. To file on a cartridge tip. A field modification so small a man could do it on a table, in a shed, by lamplight, then slide the round back into a bandolier as if nothing had changed. The method was already old. In 1898, before the Battle of Omdurman, British troops had done the same thing to .303 Mark II ammunition. They filed down the nose and exposed the lead core. The bullet had come out of the British imperial system, including production at the Dum Dum Arsenal near Calcutta in 1895. From that name came the label that would stick to expanding rounds forever. In the weeks before Omdurman, the International Review of the Red Cross records that hundreds of thousands of British bullets were filed this way. So when Osterley revived the method in 1940, it was not inventing anything. It was pulling open a drawer the law had already tried to slam shut. And the law had tried. On July 21, 1899, Hague Declaration 4.3 was adopted by 22 votes to 2, with Portugal abstaining. The two states voting against it were the United States and the United Kingdom. The target was explicit: bullets that expand or flatten easily in the human body. 8 years later, the 1907 Hague Regulations added broader language in Article 23E, forbidding weapons calculated to cause unnecessary suffering. By the time Winteringham's men were being shown a file and a .303 cartridge, this was not a gray area. It was the textbook example. The detail kept returning because of what the bullet did after impact. Cambridge's wound ballistics summary gives the contrast in stark numbers. Early .303 full metal jacket bullets might transfer around 20% of their kinetic energy through the target. Dum-Dum style expanding bullet could dump something like 80%. Same cartridge case, same rifle, same powder charge. One version tended to pass through, the other opened, flattened, and tore. For a guerrilla fighter in a hedgerow, that difference was practical. He did not need a neat penetration chart. He needed one shot to matter before the patrol fired back. So take the scenario Osterley was built around. German infantry move down a lane in Middlesex or Kent. A Home Guard volunteer is hidden 30 yards off the road with a .303 rifle that may be older than he is. He gets one clean trigger pull before the column scatters. If the cartridge is standard ball, the man he hits may go down or may not. If the tip has been filed, the bullet is meant to deform on impact and inflict far worse tissue damage. The immediate result is concrete. More stopping effect, more shock, more blood. More chance the target cannot get up and point back. These men were meant to be stay-behind fighters, not line infantry under inspection. In that setting, legality starts to look ornamental. That helps explain why weapons like this kept reappearing. Armies banned them on paper, then reached for them when defeat seemed possible, and survival shrank to one ambush and one escape route. There is a complication. Not every grotesque rifle wound proved illegal ammunition. Pointed full metal jacket bullets can yaw and tumble in tissue. They can break bone, change direction, and leave damage that witnesses later describe as explosive or expanding, even when the bullet was perfectly standard. In war, people see a wound and build a story around it. That happened constantly in the First World War. It happened before and after. So the filed tip cartridge acquired a second life as an accusation. Sometimes true, sometimes impossible to prove. A mutilated body did not come with a label. That uncertainty hangs over Osterley as well. The evidence supports the training, it supports the advice, it supports the method. What it does not give us is the clean combat report historians always want at the end of a trail like this. Britain was never invaded. There is no clear battlefield incident tying an Osterley-trained Home Guardman, a filed .303 round, and a dead German soldier into one documentable chain. The weapon was prepared for a war on British soil that never came. That leaves the episode stranger, not smaller. Osterley preserved more than an isolated trick. It showed a state under mortal threat quietly tolerating the return of a weapon its own empire had helped turn into an international taboo. Britain in 1940 was publicly fighting for civilization and bound by the laws of war. Yet in one corner of West London, a guerrilla school was telling volunteers to take standard ammunition and make it illegal by hand. No factory mark changed, no new designation appeared. A cartridge went in lawful and came out forbidden. That preparation is what lasts. Not the battlefield use we cannot prove, but the work we can picture. In that invasion summer, with the Luftwaffe overhead and road signs being turned and hedges measured for ambush, men sat over ordinary British rifle rounds and worked a file across the tip. Shavings fell onto the wood. A brighter spot appeared at the nose. Then the cartridge went back into the pouch, almost normal in the half-light. Number 7. Reversed rifle bullets. On September 15, 1916, near Flers-Courcelette on the Somme, German infantry watched something move toward them at 3.7 miles an hour and learned that ordinary rifle fire had just lost its job. The British Mark I was slow, loud, and mechanically miserable. It still brought 28 tons of trouble, wrapped in up to 12 millimeters of armor. It carried a crew of 8. On that first day of tank warfare on the Western Front, the shock was not only physical. Bavarian troops facing it were badly shaken. The problem was simple. A standard 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser round could kill a man cleanly enough. Against thin plate, it often failed in exactly the wrong way. The pointed nose could glance off, it could break up, it could dump its energy into the outside of the armor. So somewhere between the trench line, the supply chain, and the ordnance office, German soldiers landed on a brutal fix. Pull the bullet, reverse it, seat it base first in the same cartridge case, and sometimes push it with a stronger charge. It sounds absurd. It was an emergency. The object that survives is almost disappointing to look at. No futuristic dart, no special black tip. Just a normal Mauser cartridge made wrong, on purpose. The long, pointed bullet is flipped around so the flat base faces forward. If you know what a rifle round should look like, the mistake hits it once. If you do not, it looks nearly normal. That is what makes it such good evidence. The logic is visible. Flat base first. That was the whole idea. A pointed bullet hitting armor can skid or shatter. A flat base hits the plate like a tiny punch. Sometimes it dented the armor. Sometimes it punched through. Sometimes it did something worse. The plate bulged inward and threw fragments off its inner face into the crew compartment. Not a neat penetration, a spray of metal. Inside a Mark I, with 8 men packed into a hot steel box, that was enough. The armor did not need to split open dramatically. It only had to wound the tank from the inside. That explains why such a crude-looking answer could still terrify trained crews. The Mark I was considered proof against ordinary bullets, shrapnel, and most shell splinters. Fuller wrote as much. But in war, proof almost never means safe. It means safe until somebody finds the seam, the angle, the distance, the material, or the trick. To us, 12 millimeters of armor sounds thin because we know what came later. In 1916, to riflemen in a trench, it was a moving wall. They attacked the wall with the only thing they had. The document stopped lining up after that. Some retellings describe trench improvisation. Soldiers pulled bullets with basic tools, reversed them by hand, and made anti-tank ammunition out of desperation. Other summaries say reversed rounds were factory-loaded too, produced in a more centralized way because the need was too urgent and too widespread to leave entirely to infantrymen with pliers. Both may be true at different moments. The record preserves the cartridge, its effect, and the accusations around it more clearly than it preserves the exact path it took into a rifleman's pouch. So you are left with a small piece of brass and lead that does not quite match its own story. If it was only a trench trick, why does it keep turning up in formal descriptions? If it was a regular issue answer, why does it look so improvised, so temporary, so much like something a soldier would invent in a panic? The cartridge itself carries the contradiction. The legal shadow around it made that worse. The 1899 Hague Declaration banned bullets that easily expand or flatten in the human body. That rule targeted anti-personnel ammunition, the logic behind the dum-dum bullet. Reversed bullets were not automatically illegal when used as anti-armor ammunition. That is the key distinction. But once you turn a projectile around so its exposed base hits first, you move uncomfortably close to the look and the mechanical behavior of the very kind of ammunition the laws of war were trying to stigmatize. So what was it? An anti-tank expedient or an illegal anti-personnel round in disguise? Mostly the first, but the second was the accusation that gave it a life beyond the battlefield. That is often how banned weapons enter memory. The thing begins as a narrow answer to a technical problem. Then someone can describe it as cruel, irregular, or dishonorable, and it moves into a different archive. Not just ordnance history, moral history. The paperwork changes, the memory changes. The object turns toxic. That also explains why this chapter sits oddly in a World War II list. Reversed rifle bullets are the ancestor here, not the main act. They belong to the first tank panic of 1916. Far more than to standard battlefield practice in 1939 or 1944. By June 1917, Germany had a more formal answer. The 7.92mm K bullet, a proper armor-piercing round with a tool steel core. Favorable conditions, it had about a 1 in 3 chance of penetrating 12 to 13 millimeters of armor at up to 100 meters. That was still no miracle, but it was a real anti-armor solution. Not a cartridge wearing its own bullet backwards. The reversed round was being pushed aside almost as soon as it became famous. Soldiers disliked it. Rifles could dislike it even more. Higher pressures and ugly stresses were not a healthy relationship for a Mauser. Once dedicated anti-tank rifles arrived later, the whole backward bullet idea looked exactly like what it was. A stopgap from the few months when tanks had appeared and doctrine had not caught up. Stopgaps reveal a lot, sometimes more than the perfected weapons that replace them. They show the instant an army is caught naked by a new machine and has to answer with whatever is already in its hands. No clean design cycle, no time for theory. A steel box crosses no man's land. Your bullets bounce. So you make the bullet wrong on purpose. That is the line running through this. The weapons that worked were not always refined. Sometimes they were immediate, deniable, and just outside the rules. The reversed bullet was all three. It answered a real battlefield problem. It also looked incriminating the moment anyone held it up to the light. By World War II, the infamous backwards bullet was already a relic of 1916. Number 6. 7.92mm B Patrone observation rounds used against infantry. You're behind a scope in the east. Winter light. Bad light, really. A man moves at the edge of rubble, maybe 300 meters out. You squeeze. The 7.92mm round leaves a carabiner 98K at around 800 meters per second. For a split second, it's just another rifle shot. Then it lands. The impact throws back a flash and a puff of smoke. Tiny, sharp, impossible to miss. You don't need a spotter. The bullet spots itself. That is where this starts to turn. This round was not made for that job. In 1935, German ammunition designers put the 7.92 by 57 B Patrone into production as an observation cartridge. That word matters. Observation. Not assault, not anti-personnel. The idea was brutally practical. Machine gun crews needed to see where their fire was landing, especially at distance, especially against aircraft, vehicles, or fuel. So they built a projectile weighing about 10.85 grams, or 167 grains, with a tiny internal impact mechanism. When it struck, the mechanism set off a small charge and ignited phosphorus. Not a fireball, just enough flash and smoke to mark the hit. In a heavy weapon, that made sense. A machine gun walks rounds onto a target. An aircraft gunner fires fast and corrects in real time. If one bullet gives you a visible point of impact, the whole burst gets smarter. In that role, it was a specialized round with a specialized purpose. War rarely leaves categories alone. By late 1944 and early 1945, on the Eastern Front, German snipers were fighting in conditions where every edge mattered and every rule was under strain. War accounts and ammunition histories keep returning to the same claim. B Patrone was issued specifically for sniper use in the East, in part because German forces believed Soviet troops were already using explosive rifle bullets. The paperwork is frustratingly thin. The claim is widely repeated. The direct surviving order is harder to pin down. But the battlefield logic is plain enough. Once soldiers believe the other side has crossed a line, that line starts to look negotiable. Now take that same cartridge. Same 7.92 by 57 case. Same observation bullet. Same tiny charge meant to announce impact. Load it into a scoped K98K and aim at a man. Not a vehicle, not an aircraft, not a fuel tank. Nothing else changes. No new invention, no redesign, no secret prototype with a code name. Just a field repurposing. But legally and morally, that single shift flips the meaning of the round. The band sitting behind all of this was old, much older than World War II. In 1868, the St. Petersburg Declaration renounced explosive or incendiary projectiles under 400 grams when used against personnel. 400 grams. This bullet was nowhere near that. The full B Patrone cartridge was rifle-sized. The projectile itself was about 10.85 grams. Fired at a person for its explosive or incendiary effect, it landed squarely inside a category European armies had publicly tried to shut down before the Kaiserreich even existed. That is the part people tend to miss. The forbidden element was not some exotic super bullet built from scratch for atrocity. It was a range-finding tool pointed at the wrong target. That is what makes it revealing. Most damning field modifications are often the smallest. No hacksaw, no filed metal, no extra fuse wire. Just a quiet decision that this ammunition will do a different job than the one printed on the label. For the man on the receiving end, that distinction meant nothing. Picture the hit. A round meant to mark impact for a machine gun crew strikes a human body. The point was not raw blast. This was not artillery in miniature. But on contact, that little internal mechanism still worked. Flash. Ignition. Damage out of proportion to the size of the bullet. Some sources put its practical use as an explosive projectile at about 600 meters. That is plenty of room for a trained sniper with optics. Far enough that you may never hear the shot clearly before the effect arrives. Far enough that the man behind the rifle can watch through glass and know exactly where he placed it. That usefulness sits at the center of the story. It hit the target, and it reported the hit. It collapsed uncertainty. In sniper work, that is gold. There is another reason the story spreads so widely, even where the documentation thins out. It fits the texture of the war's last phase. By 1945, Germany was short on time, short on men, and long on improvisation. Formal categories were breaking down. Ammunition meant for one platform drifted into another. Emergency logic replaced clean doctrine. If a machine gun observation round could give a sniper visible confirmation, and if the enemy was believed to be using similar methods, and if the front was collapsing anyway, the temptation was obvious. Not because it was elegant, because it was there. Notice how deniable it was. A sawn-off gun announces itself. Filed bullet leaves a visible scar. A booby trap screams intent. A bipatrone can sit in a bandolier looking almost respectable. A head stamp from 1939. Factory-made, proper issue, bureaucratically clean. The act itself hides in the context, what it was fired from and who it was fired at. That made it harder to prosecute in the moment and easier to excuse afterward. Observation ammunition. A neat phrase, very tidy, until the observation being made is whether a human body has just been struck. So this is not a story about a mad scientist round. It is a story about administrative language covering a battlefield adaptation. The cartridge began as a practical aid for heavy machine guns. On the Eastern Front, the same feature that helped correct fire also made it attractive to a sniper who wanted immediate visual proof. One tiny flash, one puff of smoke, one man behind a scope, no longer guessing. The B-Patron did not become notorious because engineers designed an outlaw bullet in 1935. It became notorious because late war soldiers found the quickest way to turn a legal tool into an illegal effect. Not a new weapon, the same weapon moved one step sideways. B-Patron was used on the Eastern Front only, in response to the Russians using explosive bullets. Number 5. Short-fused M24 stick grenades. On May 25, 1943, an American soldier kneels in the dirt beside a dead German and finds what looks like a prize, a Model 24 stick grenade. 14 inches long, about 1 pound 5 ounces in the hand. Thin metal head, hollow wooden handle, porcelain pole ball tucked at the end of a cord. He has seen them before. Everybody has. The long German potato masher, simple enough to understand at a glance. Pull the cord, count the delay, throw. So he reaches for it. The field around him is wet and flattened. A cart track is cut by tires. A few white scraps of ration paper are pressed into the mud. Somewhere off to the left, a machine gun gives a short burst and stops. Not close. Close enough. He shifts on one knee, wipes the handle with his thumb, and checks the head for dents. Nothing strange. The wood is dirty but intact. The grenade looks ordinary. Behind him, another man tells him to leave it. He half turns, grins, and says it is only a stick grenade. Under normal conditions, that meant a known amount of time. The standard BZ-24 igniter gave about 4 to 5 seconds. That was the whole bargain. Pull, throw, duck. 4 to 5 seconds of human margin. 4 to 5 seconds for muscle memory to do its work. The grenade was built around that pause. Even its awkward shape made sense because of it. No spoon to hold down. No safety lever clamped under the hand while you hesitated. Once armed and pulled, the sequence had already started. The warning had gone out in plain language that same day. U.S. Military intelligence told men that a captured Model 24 might appear normal and still be altered so that when the cord was pulled, it detonated immediately instead of after the expected delay. Not a different grenade, not a visibly special one. The same head, the same handle, the same porcelain ball. The change was inside the timing. The soldier in the road does not know any of that yet. Or maybe he has heard something half-remembered, one of those quick briefings given over cold coffee and maps. Be careful with souvenirs. Watch enemy grenades. Do not trust captured fuses. But the front is full of instructions, and most of them die the moment a familiar object lands in your palm. This one feels manageable. 6 ounces of TNT in the head, but manageable. He has thrown worse. He has seen men throw these back. He rolls the handle in his fingers and finds the little cap at the bottom. A normal grenade of this type was often made safe to carry by transport, not by heroic design. 15 grenades could travel in a case with 15 detonators packed separately, because the real safety was that the detonator was inserted before action, not carried live all the time. But this one is already assembled, already ready, already waiting on a simple assumption. If a man recognizes an object, he thinks he understands it. He unscrews the cap. The porcelain ball drops into view. That tiny white bead is what makes the trap work. It looks almost childish, almost decorative. You pinch it with 2 fingers and feel no danger in the motion at all. No heavy bolt, no loud click. Just a cord, a tug, and then, in the ordinary version, a pause long enough to save your hand. At a desk, the warning was clinical. Captured grenades may be booby-trapped by defeating the delay. In a shell-churned field, the language turns physical. You are breathing hard. Your gloves are wet. You are crouched over a weapon built to ask one thing of your nerves. Do you trust what you already know? He hooks the ball. The man behind him says, sharper this time, don't. Familiar enemy weapons earn trust by shape alone. The Model 24 had become recognizable across entire fronts. Troops knew the silhouette before they knew the mechanics. Long stick, metal can, German grenade. Its simplicity invited confidence. There was no maze of levers and clips, no complicated drill, just a pull cord and, supposedly, time. He starts to pull. Cut to July 15, 1944. A U.S. Navy bomb disposal correction note, dry as dust, adds the detail that would matter too late to the man in the road. Igniter caps were color-coded. Blue meant the normal 4.5-second delay. Red meant 1 second. Gray meant no delay. Red or gray, the note warned, were likely indicators of a booby trap. Blue bought a throw. Red bought panic. Gray bought nothing. No bomb disposal bulletin is crouching next to him in the mud. All he sees is a grenade that has not announced itself. No sawed fuse, no obvious wire, no crude alteration taped to the side. That was the elegance of it, if you can use that word for something this mean. The weapon did not need to become more powerful. Its listed danger radius was already 12 to 14 yards in one 1943 manual, 16 yards in a 1944 Navy table. It only needed to arrive at the wrong speed. 1 second instead of 4.5, or none at all. The deadliest change was not in the blast, but in the expectation. His fingers tighten. You can feel how the body prepares for the standard sequence. Pull. Realize it is live. Arm swings back. Weight shifts to throw. Eyes flick toward a wall, a ditch, a doorway. The whole movement depends on a little pocket of future time. The trap removes that pocket. It does more than shorten the fuse. It takes the thrower's own drilled response and turns it against him. The cord comes free. If the cap is blue, he still has a chance to hurl it, maybe feel the scrape of the handle leaving his palm before he dives flat. If it is red, 1 second is barely enough for recognition. Enough to know, not enough to correct. If it is gray, there is no sequence at all. No count, no throw. Only the instant when a man realizes that what he thought was a weapon in his hand was a trap set for the hand itself. The soldier behind him sees the arm move. He sees the ball. He sees his friend begin to rise for the throw. Then the grenade does not wait. Number 4. Bundled M24 stick grenades. On May 25, 1943, far from the Atlantic Wall, a U.S. military intelligence officer sat down to explain a German stick grenade to American soldiers. The report was dry, almost bored with its own precision. 1 foot, 2 inches long, 1 pound 5 ounces in weight, about 6 ounces of explosive filler, a pull cord igniter in the wooden handle, a delay of 4 to 5 seconds. In other words, the standard M24. Simple, familiar, dangerous in a way armies understood. That neat catalog described the grenade Germany had designed. It did not describe the one German soldiers were building once the war closed in. For that, there is a man named Vater. Probably in 1944, on the Atlantic Wall in occupied France, a Wehrmacht propaganda photographer identified in the Bundesarchiv record simply as Vater took a picture inside a coastal artillery trench. The official subject was above the lip of the trench. In the foreground, German soldiers fire Karabiner 98K rifles into the sky in a strained attempt at anti-aircraft defense. It is the kind of scene propaganda loved because it looked active, defiant, almost cinematic. Men aiming upward, muzzles flashing, France behind them. But the most honest object in the frame lies lower, half neglected, behind the performance. Resting in the trench is a bundled M24 charge. 1 live stick grenade in the middle, extra grenade heads lashed around it like a crude iron flower. See that, and the image stops behaving like propaganda. Fata did not just catch a weapon, he caught an admission. The standard M24 was a blast grenade, good for shock, good for concussion, for clearing a room, rattling men in a trench, punishing anyone too close to the detonation. It was weak in fragmentation unless fitted with a sleeve, and blast alone was not always enough against the ugly problems infantry kept meeting at arm's length. Concrete, wire, engine decks, open hatches, bunkers with firing slits just thick enough to survive ordinary grenades. The answer was brutally simple. If 1 grenade was not enough, make 1 grenade set off 6 more. That was the bundle. Not a separate factory-made anti-tank miracle, not a polished new weapon with a new designation and a manual of its own. A workaround. Soldiers took 6 extra M24 heads and fixed them around 1 central stick grenade, using that center grenade as the initiator. 1 pull cord, 1 delay, 7 explosive heads going off together. If each M24 head carried about 165 grams of filler, then in theory you were concentrating roughly 1.155 kilograms of explosive into something one man still had to carry, arm, and throw. Now drop into Vata's trench. Wet earth, timber, the sea not far away. Somewhere beyond the frame sit bunkers, obstacles, and the hard geometry of the Atlantic Wall. In front of you, rifles crack upward at aircraft, almost uselessly. Behind that small show of resistance sits the real close-range tool for when steel or concrete gets too near. It is not elegant. It is thick, awkward, and heavy in a way the standard M24 was never meant to be. The original grenade weighed 1 pound 5 ounces. Add 6 more heads, and the whole logic changes. The handle still gives you leverage, yes, but the balance is wrong now. The throw is shorter. The margin is thinner. Same 4 to 5 second delay that felt manageable in a normal grenade becomes a race when the target is a bunker embrasure or the rear deck of a tank that can shoot back before your arm finishes the motion. The bundle matters in this story of banned or buried weapons for a plain reason. It worked where the official issue grenades stopped being enough. The archival photo is listed as Bild 101 II-M2 KBK-196-34. That sounds like bureaucracy, but bureaucracy often preserves what doctrine tries to smooth over. The picture does not show a sleek anti-armor system. It shows infantry improvisation sitting in plain sight of a propaganda camera. That matters because it muddies the category completely. Some of the weapons in this video were formally prohibited, hidden, or denied. The bundled M24 is slipperier than that. Available sources describe it clearly. German technical summaries mention it. Allied intelligence described the standard grenade family and knew the Germans adapted munitions in the field. Surviving captions explicitly frame the bundle as useful against armor or bunkers, and other references add wire obstacles to the list. The question is not whether men used it. They did. The harder question is where exactly it sat between doctrine and desperation. Fatah's photograph gives one answer, but only one. If a propaganda photographer was allowed to capture the thing at all, then this was not some hidden laboratory abomination. It had become recognizable enough to be unremarkable. Recognizable did not mean comfortable. The bundle solved a problem by creating another one. To make a grenade hit harder, soldiers made it bulkier, heavier, and more dangerous to the man holding it. To break a bunker, they had to get close to a bunker. To cripple a tank, they had to get close enough to place or drop the charge where armor was weak, over an engine deck, into an open hatch, against vulnerable structure. Every bit of extra explosive increased the effect on the target, but it also advertised the poverty of the situation. If this was your answer, better answers were missing. The chapter's rhythm changes here. After the neat malice of a short fuse comes something clumsier and, in its own way, more revealing. The bundled grenade was not cruel because it cheated time. It was cruel because it told the truth about range. About what soldiers do when they need demolition power and have only infantry tools. About how often the most effective weapon is really just the least bad option left in a trench. So when people call it a super grenade, that misses the point. It was stronger, yes, but strength was almost beside the issue. Its real function was concentration. More blast, delivered by hand, at distances where the thrower was still inside the danger of the target's reply. Weapons like this slide easily toward rumor, euphemism, or silence. Armies like weapons that look intentional. They like clean categories: grenade, mine, launcher, charge. This thing sat between them. Too improvised to look modern, too useful to dismiss, too revealing to celebrate. Officially, it was never the glamorous face of German anti-tank warfare. On the ground, in Fatah's trench, it was what men reached for when the issued grenade was not enough and nothing better was in arm's reach. Number 3. Teller mines, rigged with anti-lift grenades. On March 11, 1943, near Aram in Tunisia, sappers of the 276th Field Company, Royal Engineers, moved into a German minefield while a British War Office camera watched from a safe distance. No charges going off, no dramatic rush, just procedure. A detector swung low over the sand. White tape marked a lane only inches wider than a boot. Then a cloth-covered wire ring was lowered around a circular metal case half buried in the ground. The film title was plain enough: Lifting a Teller Mine, Number 2, with Booby Trap. It sounds like a special case, one nasty surprise among many ordinary mines. The evidence points the other way. In North Africa, Allied intelligence had already learned to treat almost every teller as if it had a second life. People hear teller mine with grenade underneath and picture some exotic supermine, a rare piece of battlefield sadism built in a factory for one job only. It was not that. A teller mine was, at base, a German anti-tank mine, roughly 12.5 inches across, about 3 to 4 inches deep depending on the model, around 18 to 21 pounds in total weight, carrying 12 pounds of TNT. A vehicle weapon. It sat low in a road or track and waited for 250 to 400 pounds of pressure from a wheel or track. But German troops kept modifying that simple idea in the field. A mine that kills one tank can be cleared. A mine that kills the clearance team keeps the road closed. Start with the hardware. The teller did not need to be reinvented to become a trap. It already had openings for it. U.S. military intelligence reported in June 1943 that these mines had 2 auxiliary recesses, one in the side and one in the bottom, specifically usable for secondary detonating devices. That changes the picture. You are not looking at a flat pressure mine and a separate booby trap. You are looking at a system with spare sockets built into it, waiting for someone to add a second trigger. That second trigger was often much simpler than the legend suggests. Not elaborate clockwork, not some secret German wonder fuse. Thin wire, a peg in the ground, a pole igniter. Intelligence reports describe wires run below or beside the mine, tripwires fixed to small stakes about 6 inches high, and anti-lift devices arranged so that the moment a sapper shifted the metal case, tension changed and the igniter fired. The grenade version existed as the crude field expression of the same logic, but the logic matters more than the exact component. The teller mine was bait. The anti-lift device was waiting for the man who touched it. The least theatrical examples were often the worst. Allied reports warned that apparently unarmed teller mines could be left exposed with visible safety features still in place. They could look almost considerate, as if the Germans had abandoned them unfinished. Underneath could be a second trigger, hidden where the man clearing it would discover it only after committing his hands and body to the lift. The mine did not have to be concealed perfectly. It only had to look routine. You can feel how that changes a sapper's movement by inches. He kneels, he probes, he clears sand from the rim. The object is only about a foot across, but it holds 12 pounds of TNT. For a track, a wheel, a leg, a team. Every instinct says get it out of the lane and move on. But pressure from above is no longer the main problem. Release, tension, displacement, those are the threats now. The exact motion required to make the road safe might be the motion that fires the charge. Once engineers understood the trick, their behavior changed. They stopped trusting the first layer of evidence. In some cases, instead of lifting a teller by hand, clearance teams pulled it from a distance. One reported method used 100 yards of signal cable. Not 10 feet, not the length of a rifle sling. 300 feet of wire, because the safest place to inspect a suspicious mine was somewhere else. This was not just a North African improvisation caught in one report. On November 16, 1944, at Mayel in the Netherlands, Royal Engineers were filmed lifting a teller mine using a 100-foot cord because it might be booby-trapped. Same mine, same fear. Different country, more than a year later. That persistence cuts through another myth, that this was mostly rumor, the kind of battlefield story engineers tell each other until every mine becomes cursed. Rumor does not produce repeated clearance methods. Rumor does not make men string out 100 yards of cable before touching a 20-pound disc in the mud. The danger they expected was consistent. A side recess could take an igniter. A bottom recess could hide one underneath. One mine could sit atop another, inverted, so lifting the top disturbed the lower device. A nearby truck, a barrel, a door, even a derelict aircraft could be wired into the same logic through the side well. The common feature was not the exact trap, it was the transfer of target. First the tank, then the engineer. That is why the phrase anti-lift grenade needs care. Primary Allied reports confirm the anti-lifting concept in detail, but they do not always say the trigger was literally a hand grenade under every teller. Often they describe pull igniters, wires, pegs, stacked mines, or prepared charges. If you imagine one universal setup, pin half pulled, grenade spoon trapped beneath the casing, you are probably seeing the legend more clearly than the archive. But if you imagine a teller mine altered so that lifting it fired an explosive device beneath or beside it, you are squarely in the territory the sources describe. The sensational version is too neat. The real one is broader, dirtier, and harder to predict. A standard mine can be studied. A pressure threshold can be learned. A fuse can be recognized. A field modification built from whatever igniter, wire, peg, or grenade happened to be available turned clearance into a contest against variation. The sapper was not just reading a weapon. He was reading the last decision of the man who laid it. That man may have had a proper anti-lift igniter. He may have used thin wire and a stake. He may have improvised with a grenade because it was what he had. The result for the man kneeling over the casing was the same. The mine was no longer waiting for a vehicle alone. Go back to Aram, the white tape, the detector, the ring lowered carefully around the steel lid. The camera records a mine being lifted, But what it is really recording is distrust, turned into drill. In 1943, engineers had learned that a teller mine could be dangerous in the obvious way, and then dangerous again at the exact moment relief set in. It looked like an anti-tank weapon. It behaved like a trap for specialists. In that quiet strip of marked sand, the road ahead opens only because someone treats a 12-inch metal disc as if it might still kill after it is found. What stays is not the explosion, not even the mine itself. A cleared path, a harmless-looking circle in the ground. And the point where safety should have begun, the moment someone tried to lift it. Number 2. Booby-trapped helmets with grenades. In 1996, 51 years after the war, states signing amended Protocol 2 to the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons wrote down a rule that sounds almost absurd until you know why it exists. No booby traps disguised as apparently harmless portable objects, specifically designed to contain explosives. Portable objects, harmless-looking things, the kind you pick up with one hand, a cup, a tool, a child's toy, a helmet. Start with the pull, 9 to 13 pounds. That is the figure U.S. intelligence gave for the German ZZ-35 pull igniter. Not 90, not some massive wrenching force. 9 to 13. Enough resistance to survive a little weather, enough sensitivity that one bored, tired infantryman could supply it without even meaning to. Lift with one hand, hook with a boot, tug without thinking. That was the design. Now the charge. In the February 1945 U.S. intelligence bulletin, American investigators described a steel helmet left on the ground on the western and southern fronts during the German retreat of the winter of 1944 to 45. Under that helmet sat a Sprengkörper 28 explosive charge. Attached to it was the ZZ-35 pull igniter. One wire ran to the inside of the helmet. Another ran to a fixed point. The geometry is simple. The soldier supplies motion. The fixed point supplies resistance. The igniter does the rest. The report is blunt about the trigger action. Lifting or kicking the helmet was enough. That detail tells you what kind of weapon this was. Not anti-tank, not anti-personnel in the ordinary sense. It was built to punish habit. A steel helmet on a roadside is not rare. It is battlefield clutter. Salvage. It is a souvenir. It is something to move before a truck comes through. The lethal part was not only under the dirt, it was inside a decision Allied soldiers made every day. Pick it up, nudge it aside, see if it is worth keeping. By 1945, U.S. intelligence already knew this was not a one-off trick. Go back 7 months, July 1944, another intelligence bulletin. Same logic, wider pattern. Pull igniters under helmets, inside water bottles, near abandoned guns, around other attractive objects. The common feature was not the container, it was the bait. Something familiar, something portable, something that invited one quick, casual touch before caution caught up. The helmet trap belongs to a larger family. The corpse trap from the last section. The souvenir trap in a rubbish heap. The grenade left where someone will pocket it. Different hardware, same arithmetic. One object, one impulse, one mistake. Picture it at ground level. A German steel helmet weighs a few pounds. A man stoops, grips the rim, and gives it a quick upward jerk. That motion easily exceeds 9 to 13 pounds of pull because he is not trying to trigger a mechanism. He is trying to grab junk. If he kicks it instead, the helmet shifts, the wire snaps tight, and the igniter fires just the same. No careful search, no deliberate tampering. The trap is built around the smallest possible human shortcut. That is how such a small device could spread fear so far beyond its size. A minefield tells you where not to step. A roadside helmet removes the idea of routine. Japanese manuals describe the same principle with different hardware. The Model 99 grenade, the one U.S. documents associate with Kiska, measured about 3.5 inches long, 1 5/8 inches in diameter, and weighed about 10 ounces. Its fuse delay ran about 4 to 5 seconds. small enough to pocket, small enough to forget near a fire. American manuals warned that grenades like this could be used as booby traps under a floorboard or chair. The Japanese high-explosive stick grenade had the same 4 to 5 second delay and could be rigged to a movable object such as a door or helmet. The numbers give it away. 3.5 inches, 10 ounces, 4 to 5 seconds. Not a demolition charge for a bridge, a hand-sized device that turns ordinary contact into delayed death. You disturb the object. You do not die instantly. You carry it. You drop it with other trophies. You bring it near warmth. Then the weapon finishes its work somewhere else. One U.S. anecdote from Kiska shows exactly how that worked. An American soldier collected Japanese grenades as souvenirs. They looked harmless enough, while cold, inert-looking, and mixed with other captured items. Then they were brought near a fire. That was enough. The trap had not followed him on its own. He had carried it there. When wartime bulletins grouped helmet traps beside corpse traps and souvenir traps, they were not listing random curiosities. They were mapping a doctrine of attention. Engineers could teach recognition. They could issue silhouettes of igniters, sketches of wires, lists of likely hiding places. The deeper lesson was behavioral. Curiosity kills. Tidiness kills. Trophy collecting kills. The battlefield is over, but the objects on it are still working. There's another forensic detail hidden in the phrase, booby-trapped helmet with grenade. It is probably too neat. The best documented February 1945 case was not simply a grenade under a helmet. It was a prepared charge, Sprengkörper 28, with a ZZ-35 pull-igniter. Popular memory compresses several related methods into one image: helmet as bait, grenade as triggered charge, movable object wired to an igniter. The shorthand survives because the image is memorable. The documents are messier, and messier is worse. A soldier trained to expect one exact trick can beat one exact trick. Helmet plus grenade, fine. Check under the rim, look for the spoon, search for a pin. But if the real system is broader, any attractive object, any available charge, any wire, any fixed point, then this stops being a single design. It becomes a method. Methods are harder to ban, harder to detect, much harder to unlearn when a man is tired. That folds back into the question running through this entire story. Why were the weapons that worked best so often the ones they tried hardest to ban or bury? Because worked best did not always mean the biggest blast or the cleanest engineering. Sometimes it meant the cheapest way to occupy a soldier's attention. One helmet, one igniter needing 9 to 13 pounds, one road that now has to be treated as if every loose object on it might be loaded. By the time lawyers wrote rules against apparently harmless portable objects in 1996, the design principle had already proved itself across decades. Not by destroying tanks, by making a man afraid to pick up a helmet. The object was worth almost nothing. The hesitation it created was worth everything. Wartime Report's key verb was only one word long: kicked. Number 1. Booby-trapped corpses with mines. On December 12, 1944, in Jungersdorf, Germany, Staff Sergeant Dwight P. Ellett of the U.S. Army Signal Corps photographed a dead German soldier in the basement of a shattered building. Troops of the 9th Infantry Division, 1st U.S. Army, found him after the retreat. The official caption noted an explosive visible near the corpse. The body had been left behind as bait. Picture the room: a cellar floor, rubble. A dead man where the next soldier down the steps would do what soldiers always do: check the body, search for papers, roll them over, clear the corner. Maybe just look 1 second too long. A trap like this does not need much pressure when the trigger is not a boot, but a reflex. This was not one grotesque exception. Records point the same way elsewhere. On July 1, 1941, during the Tobruk fighting, Australian Lance Corporal P.T. Saunders wrote that mines were being placed under bodies so burial parties would set them off. Burial parties, not men charging forward under fire. Men doing the slow work after the shooting. Saunders also described a German anti-personnel booby trap pattern built around about 12 pounds of explosive and 325 pellets, placed roughly 12 feet apart. Enough force to tear apart men who came in carefully, methodically, humanly. Make the cold assumption. If the rumor is true in your sector, procedure changes at once. 1 body in 10. 1 in 50. The exact odds barely matter. Every corpse becomes something to inspect before it can be identified. Every rescue can become an initiation sequence. Every burial detail becomes an engineer's problem. You do not send 1 man to check the dead. You stop. Look for wires. You probe from a distance. You delay evacuation. You leave the body where it lies until someone with the right tools and the right nerves arrives. The battlefield starts using the dead to control the living. Earlier traps on this list turned useful things into hazards. A rifle round, a grenade, a helmet, a mine that punished lifting. This pushes the same idea into the one place armies need to remain human. The dead must be collected. The wounded must be reached. Identification papers must be recovered. Graves must be dug. Weaponize that instinct, and you do more than defend ground. You corrupt the whole process. The Jungersdorf image shows how seriously the Americans treated that lesson. The photograph was taken on December 12th. It was passed for publication in censored form on December 15th. Sheaf did not fully clear it without censorship restrictions until April 16, 1945. 4 months. In a war where front lines moved fast and images moved faster, this one was handled with care. It was evidence, but it was also instruction. Show too much and you spread the method. Show too little and men miss the warning. The warning was brutally simple. The shooting may be over, but the scene is not safe. A corpse may still be part of the ambush. You can feel what that does to men entering a place like this. A shelled German town in winter, cold rooms, damp dust, a basement that smells of plaster, fuel, and rot. A body in the corner, no movement, no weapon in hand. The most dangerous thing in the room should already be finished. Instead, the safest assumption is the opposite. The stillness is the trap. The pity is the trap. The papers on the dead man may be the trap. Once soldiers learn that, the logic spreads. If a body can be rigged, then a pack can be rigged. A grave can be rigged. A dropped sidearm can be rigged. A wounded man calling for help might be wired too. One of the most disturbing accounts from the Hurtgen Forest points there. Private William H. Edwards was found alive after being wired with explosives and survived for 70 hours. Even when such stories reach us through retellings and unit memory, the point is plain. The tactic attacked mercy as directly as it attacked movement. The practical effect reaches far beyond the blast radius. A normal anti-personnel mine threatens a patch of ground. A corpse trap threatens every duty attached to a body. Medical aid, identification, intelligence search, burial. It turns one dead soldier into a denial weapon. Not because the charge is enormous, but because hesitation multiplies. One body stops 3 men, then 6, then an officer, then an engineer. Then a whole platoon is burning time in a place somebody else chose. The bomb is small. The occupation of attention is huge. That has driven almost every field modification on this list. There is also a legal wrinkle that matters. During the Second World War, the modern treaty language specifically banning booby traps associated with dead persons did not yet exist in the form people quote today. That explicit prohibition came later through the CCW framework and its amended Protocol 2 in 1996. So if we call this banned, the wording needs precision. The formal mine and booby trap rule came later. The revulsion came first. He's already understood what this violated long before the post-war language caught up. The obligation to respect and collect the dead, and the fact that some acts poison everything around them. That thread runs under this whole video. The weapons that worked best were often the ones people tried hardest to ban or bury because they did not win through raw power alone. They won by hijacking behavior. They made the enemy spend time, fear, and trust. They forced a soldier to fight his own instincts before he could fight you. A helmet on a roadside can do that. A corpse in a basement does it better. We do not know from the Jungersdorf caption which German unit set that trap, or whether it came from standing doctrine or local improvisation by men in retreat. That uncertainty makes the lesson harsher. If it was taught from above, the method was systematic. If it was improvised, then the battlefield produced it on its own. Either way, the design survives. Take the thing a soldier must touch, and make touching it cost blood. After enough incidents, even genuine dead becomes suspect. Honest rescue slows down. Burial becomes technical. The trap does not end with the blast. It keeps working afterward, inside procedure, inside memory, inside every hand that pauses before reaching down. The document that recorded the Jungersdorf scene did not dramatize any of this. It reduced the horror to a plain official note. A dead German soldier, an explosive visible near the body. That was enough.